And as you see it, I'm going to start introducing the final phase before we close. We're doing, we thought, something important for us. We have a listener today, and I'm going to introduce a special listener, MarinaBehera. Marina Ngursangzeli Behera is research tutor and MPhil stage leader at the Oxford Center for Mission Studies. She's also the editor of Transformation. That's a journal published by that center. She is from Mizoram, a state in northeast India, and belongs to the Mizoram Synod of the Presbyterian Church of India. An M.Th in Missiology from the North India Institute of Postgraduate Theological Studies. Her Doctor of Theology in the History of Christianity is earned from the Federated Faculty for Research in Religion and Culture in Kottayam, Kerala, India. From 2005 to 2012, she served as an associate professor, chairperson of the Department of History and Christianity at the United Theological College in Bangalore, India. From 2012 to 16, she held the chair of ecumenical missiology at the Ecumenical Institute in Bosse. We're grateful to Dr. Behera for serving as listener during this conference, and she will share a few of her thoughts after listening to us for 2 days. And we thank her for the plan to publish the proceedings of this conference in the journal that is called Transformation. So yes, thank you so much, Dr. Marina. Time is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul, for the introduction. This is the first time where someone has been able to pronounce my second name correctly. So thank you for that. Thank you for the invitation to listen to your presentations and discussions. And I'm thankful to Wilbert for offering me this opportunity. As Paul has introduced and said, I'm MarinaBehera, and I serve as editor of the journal Transformation, where the papers presented during this conference will be published. Usually, as editor, I receive the papers and read them. So it was a pleasure to listen to your presentations and see how they are being discussed instead of just reading them. I work in Oxford, UK, but I'm originally from Mizoram in Northeast India. I'm an example of what was talked about today under reciprocity and exchange of personnel. The church I belong to, the Presbyterian Church, was started by the work of Welsh missionaries in 1892, and the church was founded in 1907. The history of the mission in Mizoram happened during the same period you're looking at. However, it is quite different, even though it also happened in an imperial setting. I learned a lot about the beginning, the background, and events in the 100 years of the ACO in Syria and Lebanon, a region, to be honest, I'm not familiar with. As a listener, I don't see my role in repeating or summarizing the historical details that you presented. I was reflecting on what I heard from different outsider perspectives. First of all, again, a decisive story began 100 years ago. We have been looking back to the Edinburgh 1910 World Missionary Conference, to 70 of the WCC, and currently I'm involved in a study process at the occasion of the founding of the International Missionary Council 100 years ago. Listening to your presentations make me aware how all these movements and stories are somehow interrelated. They offer context to some important developments in mission, and it will be promising to connect them. If we look back at these developments, we can see that the question is not only a historical one, asking, what and how did it happen? The question that also arises is whether it is worthwhile to continue something which has 100 years of history. In looking back, do we find or rediscover something that we can learn afresh? Are there things that can teach us something about the present and offer us orientation for future work? What I heard on the first day was beyond the historical facts. the presentation of a fascinating, complex panorama through the various presentations. Borman presented us a map of the political landscape in the Middle East region. He described how in Syria and Lebanon, which was under the French authorities during the Mandate period, where not only the French were present, but many other agents were also around, like the British, the American, and even some German and other humanitarian organizations. Their relationship in the region had been negotiated on the basis of the relationships their nation or countries of origin in Europe had with other countries after the First and later the Second World War. One of the difficult and maybe painful aspects is that, as far as I'm aware, the large majority of these people were Christians. Christians that had gone through war and had fought with each other and needed to define what was more important, whether it was their national background or their Christian faith, or whether it was their agenda, maybe even a common agenda when it comes to the modernizing influence and a plea for a secular approach, as it seems to have been promoted by the Americans associated to the Rockefeller foundations. The biography of Barron, the founder of ACO, as presented by Thomas Wilde, having been a German, then French, then German, and French again, is an enlightening point as to how influential the national background was after the wars in Europe. I think what we need to do more often is to relate these different perceptions of being Christian, being influenced by the cultural background and the national embeddedness of identity in mission. Professor Haigazian mentioned how the Jesuits were using this point against the Protestant mission by denouncing them as German. A colleague recently mentioned in a discussion on the founding of the International Missionary Council how the mission organizations attempted to navigate between being deeply embedded in their nations and populations that had supported and funded their work, and their claim to being in Christian mission that transcends nations and people, what they call supranationality of mission. How did the various different agents in the region negotiated this varied dimension of their work? National background, support from the home base, the claim for unity in mission, and the political situation in the region they work in. This is something that Wilbert addressed and defined as the trans-European character, as a mark of the ACO right from its beginning. To this, I would add that I heard that even in these decades of the last century, the question of diaspora communities like the Armenian Christians in France were present, and that the mission was addressing migration issue with those from Algeria and Tunisia in France. We can perhaps rightfully say that everything that we would consider to define our postmodernity context today was already there. This afternoon, we heard about the changes in the Middle East region in the second half of the 20th century. The period was characterized mainly by Islam being the majority religion and a political force which made life for Christians very difficult. Here, the life and witness of the local churches has been highlighted as being often supported by foreign mission. I heard about mission activities focusing on converting Muslims and a surprising rise of Christian converts in Iran amidst the problems and challenges that are present in these endeavors. What I find remarkable is that the mission of the ACO Fellowship is to fight for religious freedom for all, and not only Christians, and relying on accompaniment by visits and by prayers. On the discussion about mission, what I found intriguing were the hints to discussion about the task of mission and of the mission organizations. Is it mission as proclamation and or how the missionaries and their organizations responded to humanitarian's need. I would be interested in learning more about how they decided that. Wilbert highlighted that the mission of ACO was mainly defined by its response to suffering, originally or beginning with the response to the suffering of the Armenian. I could imagine that, for instance, the possibility of raising funds in the European home countries had a decisive influence on what they were able to do. What I heard indicates that what the early missionaries did was heavily influenced locally by their reading and understanding of the need of the context, such as medical and educational services, as well as what they perceived to be the immediate needs, such as social services, setting up orphanages, etc. I'm convinced that even today, this is true. So I realize that it seems to be quite easy to raise funds for the education of children, but I hear that it is difficult to raise funds for advanced theological education, like faculty development. I heard some hints to an intriguing point as to how some of the cultural assumptions influenced and formed the way missionaries offered and communicated the gospel. For instance, in the way they gave importance to education. On the one hand, being educated has made the Armenian Christians more resilient, as well as empowered the survivors of the genocide to cope with the challenges of displacement and work towards reconditioning or restoring life. On the other hand, the type of education imparted was deeply influenced by cultural assumption. For instance, when young girls were taught to be domicile and good wives with practical skills, I assume that it is easier for us to recognize these aspects in earlier mission attempts than in our own times. The question then would be, what are our deep-seated cultural convictions and blind spot in an era we claim to be post-colonial? We might be able to identify them better by studying earlier attempts. Then again, various agents had different opportunities, as Rima Nasrallah narrated. The early female missionaries were somehow restricted in their obligations, but were able to form networks and pursue objectives that were obviously not part of the original intention when they were sent to the mission fields as teachers. I believe it is a lingering question as to how sending organizations define the mandate, and in how far or to what extent do they listen to partnering churches in the region. In how far does the idea of reciprocity affect the mandates? The role of the Armenian Evangelical Church in Syria and Lebanon was mentioned several times, and today, the Evangelical and the Assyrian churches in Iran and Egypt were mentioned. Today, I heard more than yesterday about the interaction between the congregations or representative or leaders of these local churches and the mission boards or organizations of ACO. Even though from the beginning, local Christians were employed, the integration of the missionaries' work was, if I understood correctly, primarily a reaction to the growing difficulties for foreigners to work in the Middle East. Not much was shared about the other church traditions, cooperation, and what the presence of Protestant mission meant to them. Murray van den Berg was addressing that for these Oriental churches, Protestantism is linked primarily to secular modernity. I was then wondering how the role and the work of the mission is defined today in an assumedly post-colonial world. Wilbert van Sane defined it by reciprocity, which goes beyond mutuality, to give a good common witness to Christ in all regions, in a transnational fellowship of churches, not in so-called mission fields. This means exchange of personnel from everywhere to everywhere, accompaniment and common action. This was what I heard. And on your website, I found a statement which read, ACO is a Protestant missionary association which maintains relations of brotherhood and solidarity with Christian churches and works mainly with Protestant in the Middle East. Thanks to numerous partnerships, ACO supports a wide variety of projects in the field of education, social work, health solidarity in the context of crisis, conflict resolution, theological training, and church life in local communities. I recognize here a focus on partnership in activities as an expression of the gospel. Mission as proclamation is implicit, not explicit. In the questionnaire, which was presented to us in the break, evangelism was 1 point among 10, and the only one that only churches can do. All the others can be offered by secular organizations. I think this reflects a tendency we can observe in mission today, which is a result of searching for cooperation among churches in mission and maybe a reflection of the changing role of religion in Europe, as Bure Vanderberg reminded us. For the church I belong to, inviting to Christ would still be more important, and that would be the most important dimension of mission. Then what does evangelism and proclamation mean if it is one objective among others and in relation to interfaith dialogue? If I got it right, then Murray Vandenberg proposed to say that mission can be about highlight on specific groups to be seen and heard. From what I read and follow in general, it seems to me that every mission is not only proclaiming or communicating the gospel. As an organization, it is some sort of a broker between one's own motivation and objectives, those supporting and funding the organization, and those the organization is addressing. I heard some hints towards this in the contribution of Jolly on ACO fellowship, when he distinguished between inner and external factors, and from Wilbert, when he was speaking about bringing mission and churches closer to each other. In conclusion, I understand that looking back is an attempt to establish the trajectories that led ACO and that ACO tried to follow as a fellowship in mission. I thank you for inviting me to become part of your ongoing conversation and to offer some reflection on the main focus and the presentations, and I'm looking forward to read the finalized papers when they will be submitted to Transformation for publication. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these valuable thoughts. And with that, with an overview and an occasion, an opportunity for further thinking, critical thinking about what we said for 2 days, it is the time to close this 2-day conference, valuable, I believe. So with the spirit of celebration, we end this 2-day conference honoring the 2-day contributions of so many of you, honoring the 100th anniversary, the legacy of the ACO, its people, and the churches and the community. I thank the participants and all the speakers and all the organizers, hoping to read the texts, of course, later on with further development. Surely this will open the way for much more research, which is needed. This was more than an academic exercise for all of us, because what we spoke about is meaningful personally for so many of you in this audience. It was an opportunity for fellowship among many people who know each other and others who were introduced to each other. And it is an opportunity for the rekindling of an ACO renewed mission, I believe. And Haigazian University was proud to join in this effort. So I would say, may the Lord bless us, be with us in all these places. And I thank you in the name of Christ. Thank you, ACO. Happy anniversary. Happy centenary. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, dear Paul. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.